Part of our philosophy is at some point you have to pay yourself. Some point you have to set some of what you're working aside for you, because if you consume it all, you're going to constantly be consuming it, and that's not going to lead to this funded contentment. And the easiest way to tackle that is not to strap yourself to some budget and just kill yourself to then feel like a failure and then you quit. It's telling yourself the next pay raise you get, half of it needs to be set aside in this 401k or this matching plan like you never got it. The work for yourself one's hard because they're constantly dealing with the balancing act of what's profit and what do I owe in taxes and those types of things. It's the same thing though. In those cases, we encourage them that here, let's set aside what we think we're going to owe in taxes. We're going to add a little bit on top of that was what we're going to put away for retirement or for the future. But you have to take it away from yourself somehow. And in those cases, we usually encourage setting up a separate bank account. Don't keep it all in one and set it aside. And then look, when we pay the taxes, this is what's left. That's what we're saving. You don't get to take that and now consume it. So it's separating or never getting it in the first place.
This is the Play Your Position podcast, where we huddle up, call the plays, and inspire you to run your ball into the end zone. Are you ready to score more game-winning touchdowns in your life, business, and career? Then listen up, because it's game time, baby. Now, here's your host, Mary Lou Kaiser.
Hello, Team PYP. Mary Lou Kaiser here. Welcome to today's episode of the Play Your Position podcast, where we talk about leadership and how to make your money go farther, which is the big topic of today, along with a whole lot of other things that help us lead more effective, interesting, and fulfilling lives. I've got a great guest suited up, ready to take the field. His name is Tyson Ray. Tyson, are you ready for kickoff?
I am ready to go.
Awesome. So team, here are some things that I know about Tyson Ray. He is the CEO and founding partner of Form Wealth Advisors, a wealth management firm dedicated to helping clients live a better life. Tyson's also the author of The Total Relationship, a book that teaches financial advisors how to provide meaningful value to their clients by being wholly engaged in all areas of their lives, thus allowing them the freedom and permission to live their lives. And he is coming to us today from where, Tyson?
I am coming to you today from Lake Geneva, Wisconsin.
Oh, Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Okay. So as we usually do here at PYP, get started by you setting the context for us about when you first got the call to leadership, Tyson. How old were you? What was going on in your life at the time? And then how has answering that call led you to do what you do today?
Yeah, I feel like that's such a great question because it's like, all right, there wasn't some, I think leadership is something that's implanted in all of us and that just comes out as we learn how to harness it and use it. And so I'm trying to like look back and there wasn't like some aha moment. If anything, it's almost like I learned it backwards because I'm looking back and I'm like, how did I get here? And it's just like, wow,
take us backwards.
Oh my gosh, right? So you were the kid that I went to a small school that had 3 boys and 10 girls in the class, right? So it's like, and I was kind of an outsider as far as the boys and the girls and so on and so forth. And my family didn't have a whole lot of money. In fact, my parents had gone through a bankruptcy, and so we didn't have a lot of means, and we were in an area that there was kind of the haves and the have-nots. The Lake Geneva area is a very touristy area of, homes on lakes and just a lot of wealth that comes up from the city of Chicago. And so I always felt not good enough, right? Mm-hmm. And then somewhere in that 7th grade, I was one of those kids that went out wide before you grew tall, like you built your foundation around your belly and your hips, and you just were little... you're chubby and overweight and you are prime targets to be picked on, right? When looking a certain way is a big deal and you're getting all these hormones and feelings that you don't know what to do with and just never felt good enough. And yet anytime I got onto a team or a group setting, it was all about trying to help others because I think to some extent, looking back on us, because I felt I was so hard on myself or so down on who I was that I shifted my focus to taking care of others, right? Because it's just, and what I realized as I grew into that, it just provided more opportunities to lead. And I like to say that played itself out in all kinds of ways. I think it got clarified more. I like to say I read the right book my last semester of college, because the path of leadership can go in one of two ways. You can eventually make it about yourself. And at that point, I started getting into more leadership roles in student government and in college, in fraternities, and giving different opportunities to basically take leadership. But it took me in a direction of pride, prestige, promotion. It was all about how I could get ahead. And because of the kid that was healing, right? So I was taking this hurt and now trying to fix that hurt with all these things I thought I could now have or should have from a leadership standpoint. Anyway, my last semester of college, I was reaching a point of like, okay, great. I'm a leader or successful as I thought it was defined, or as I looked to other people and said, oh, that's a leader. That's what that looks like. And yet I was looking at the reflection in the mirror in the morning and hating the person I saw. Of who I became.
Yeah.
And so my last semester of college, I like to say I read this right book about like dying to yourself and living for a different reason or for a different purpose. And that took me in a path to like realize, no, wait, this whole idea of how you got here, of caring for others, or trying to motivate and encourage others, help bring others' bests out of themselves and not give them the chubby comments and not tear them down as you were torn down. Was the right path. You started doing it for the wrong reasons. Go back to doing it for the right reasons. When I got out of college, I shifted my focus back to what do I get to do every day to put a smile on someone's face, to make them feel better, to try and help bring the best out of the people around me, to accomplish a common goal that we've agreed we want to do, and not have it be about me.
Wow. That's a powerful self-awareness journey that you went through. And the fact that you caught yourself, the end of college, what are we, 21, 22 years old? So still forming who we are and figuring out, especially for many people when college ends, that's it. Unless you've got, some people go right into grad school after that, but a lot of people don't. A lot of people take a little bit of time to go out and get a job or see the world. And to have gone through that interesting, rise, fall. So here you are today. You obviously chose a path into, the financial world, and
Yep.
you call yourself a financial advisor today. Yes.
Yes, although I hate how most financial advisors do their businesses, so I'm locked into that title. But yes,
Okay.
I am a financial advisor.
So you're helping to lead people with their money, make good decisions about investing, spending, saving, all those kinds of things. Why don't you take us into the world of finances as you see it? What's your philosophy that separates you, makes you different from that lump of that title you don't like? Why don't we start there?
Sure. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So I think kind of which ties into that, the leadership aspect after college. Or back up, the eviction notice and then the divorce that left my mom with four of us to raise, and dad kind of left town, and what that story caused me to go and get my first job when I was about 13. I think I had to be 14, and I lied on the work application.
Okay.
And but I got to go bust tables on Friday night, fish fries, and all you can eat shrimp on Saturday, which meant two things. I got to eat, which was a really big deal.
Yeah, of course.
All of a sudden, it's like, wait a second, you can make like $100 over those 2 nights, which back then was like a lot of money for a kid.
Sure.
And I got to save that in my chubby chipmunk account. And this is back in the early 90s where interest rates were still pretty high. So all of a sudden I saw interest compounding on my investment of cash. Like, oh my gosh, they put money on top of my money. What is this? And then when I was 16, they played a stock market game. And this is back when like you had to open up the paper to see what stocks were doing. Like this wasn't on some computer, right? You just saw these symbols and it was what the price was from the night before. But you were supposed to take this fake money and go pick an investment and compete against the state or other classmates on who could try and make the most. When I didn't win the competition, but I wanted to buy this stock that had gone from 12 to 7. I didn't know anything about it. I just knew it was one of these, top dropped stocks and whatever, and you're going to try and play the bounce. And I went to my mom and was like, hey, I want to buy this with my own money in my chubby chipmunk bank account. And she's like, no, like take a risk. Like this is unacceptable. Well, now, the big thing about life, right, is that had she said yes, who knows what I'd end up doing. But because she said no, I'm in finance because I spent the rest of my life trying to convince her why making investments were right. I dragged her actually into the broker's office who presented to our high school class. Thankfully, that woman timed to let my mom calm down and convince her, okay, we won't buy the stock, which was Intel, by the way, before it was inside anything. But we can buy these 2 mutual funds, and we're going to put $50 a month from the bank account in the mutual fund, and we'll dollar cost average in. And that built the little nest egg through high school and then into college. I continued to do all that. And when I came out of college, through divine interventions, I basically was able to interview and get a job going into finance on the backdrop of, like, since I was 16, I've been trying to convince my mom why it made sense to make investments. So it's not too hard to take that jump. It's kind of along the lines of leadership. About the same time, I'm in Pensacola, Florida, on the other side of the southern side of the United States from where I live now. And the first family email went out on the AOL email service, and where you had to wait and listen to all the noise like a fax was coming to like log in. Remember that, right? Thing you got mail, like, oh my gosh, I have mail. Like, now I got to figure out how to open it.
Right.
And it was the first family email that went out that basically said, hey, someone needs to move back home to the family farm where grandma is, because if someone's not there in the morning to make sure she gets her insulin, we're going to need her to put her into some care or assisted living or apartments. And if she gets removed from the farm, she's going to die because she doesn't want to leave the farm. And to the surprise of the entire family, the prodigal son basically says, hey, I'll come home. Okay. In part because I had spent the last 6 months cold calling people and strangers and trying to sell stocks and investments to people that I didn't know. And I didn't like how it felt. And it's like, okay, the conflict of how am I going to, I got to pay bills, but I got to do what's right for the client. And is this really right for the client? And does this make sense? And I realized that, wait a second, if I move home or move back to grandma's, I don't have to pay rent, right? The farm's got food, right? Those are 2 big things in a budget. And I can try and do just the right thing and not have this burden of this financial overhead I had to keep making. And so that's what I did. That led me to a small office in a nearby town that had a father-daughter team. The senior advisor started the business in his basement about 35 years prior. The daughter graduated high school and just went to work for dad because that was just what was expected of her, not what she wanted. And I show up because it was an affiliation of the same firm I was at in Pensacola. And that became another opportunity to kind of, from a leadership standpoint, from leading from the bottom, because I was a new guy, but I started realizing the daughter didn't really want to be there, and the father needed a successor. And I started working with them, and after about 4 or 5 years, actually took over their practice. But the practice started one day because I decided I was going to have am I going to do this moment? Am I going to keep doing this? Is this what I'm called to do? And I went into his office and just said, hey, Mary Lou, can you show me your portfolio after the last 35 years of being a stockbroker in the 80s and 90s? Because I want to see how much money you made. And you looked at me kind of funny and said, why? And I said, well, because I want to see if I want to stay in this business or not. And there was a little reluctance. And I'm like, if you're not willing to show me your portfolio, then I might as well quit, right? Because it's like, if I can't get somebody to tell me what they have, I can't do anything.
Right.
Well, long story short, they went and printed the portfolio and brought it to me. And I'm looking at this, 7-figure portfolio of 80s and 90s stocks that have just grown dramatically. And he was looking for all this affirmation, like, wow, this is amazing. And I looked at him and said, hey, wait a second. This is in a joint account. Do you know how much estate taxes you're going to pay if you guys died? This should be in a trust. Like, I had learned all this information part of being a leader, I think, is to be a student teacher where you're constantly perfecting the knowledge. And it's not to make other people feel dumb. It's to make the dumbest person feel smart, or to be able to talk in a level that creates understanding for that person, which just goes back to ego, right? The smartest person that wants to make sure they're smart is all about them, not necessarily about the others.
Right.
So anyway, long story short, I got access to their portfolio to do planning and came back and showed, like, here's the millions of dollars you're going to pay in estate taxes, not knowing about 3 months before I walked into the office, they had cut $1 million estate tax check to the United States government for estate taxes from a client's account. And he was so beside himself that he had to sell these precious stocks to cut this check. And to this day, I still have a copy of the check. Wow. That he was like, I want to fix this, but I can never get my wife to agree to making these changes. And the story goes, I said, okay, why don't we bring her in with you, and you can't talk, and let me explain it because she hasn't listened to you yet. So let's try something different.
Typical.
And I only had to kick him on the table once because he started talking, because it's like, no, you know, and she's perturbed that he's not retired. She's upset he's worked so long, like the job was more important, those types of things in this long-term relationship. So anyway, I looked at her and I tried to explain that you guys are going to lose half of what you have. And she didn't really that didn't seem to register. And I said, how many places of China? Do you have family China? Yes. Do you have 8 or 12 settings? She's like, well, 12. I said, okay, well, 6 of them are going to the government. And I said, you're going to lose half of everything you have. It's everything you have. And she kind of cocked her head to the side. And I said, you have one daughter, but every left shoe is going to the government. And you have 2 Toyotas.
Yeah.
One Toyota is going to the government. By the time I got done with the 2 Toyotas, she looked at her husband and said, you better fix this. And she looked at me and she's like, do you know how to fix it? I said, yes, I know how to fix it. She said, good, fix it. And she got up and walked out, and we got to go fix it. The point of that is it was all about seeing a problem and how to help.
Yes.
I wasn't selling anything. I was trying to actually figure out, am I called to do this? And that then led to, after fixing that, the opportunity to learn more how to do it. And then I went back to him and I said, do we have other clients we should be doing this with? And that birthed the partnership that a few years later he retired.
Yep.
Which was a long way to get to your question. Why am I different? Most people don't have 25 years in the industry where they haven't had to sell, because I took over a practice of clients that, living at grandma's house rent-free and I got to eat for free, I could just do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
And when you could just do the right thing, all this opportunity just keeps showing up, because I can sit here and say, you know what, Mary Lou, I know that we can try and beat rates of return, and I know this interest rate's low, but I also know the clients that have these houses paid for and there is no debt just have a greater peace of mind.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so it's amazing. One of the differences we find is we're in the permission business to try and give our clients permission to go enjoy this money, which is the exact opposite of the advisor who's trying to be paid by having more assets under management.
Yeah. Oh, that's okay. First of all, I want to acknowledge a couple of things that in this story that are, and for me, like the big ahas. The one is, you didn't have on your plan to go take care of your grandmother. Like, you had moved away. You were setting up a life for yourself. You'd picked a place that was the polar opposite of where you'd grown up. And yet, out of, this primitive email back then, right? AOL and all that stuff, comes this message. And one of the things that I've always loved about Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich, is he talks about the sly disguises of opportunity, which often show up in ways that don't look like opportunity. They look like hardship, or, oh, I'm going to have to give up my independence here in Pensacola and go back. Most people would not even take that opportunity, but
I was failing to my peers. Like, you're going home, you failure, right? You're giving up your career and your independence. You're moving all that home to care for grandma. Like, what is that?
Right. But what came from that is everything you have now. That decision to do that, which was the opposite of what the common person would have chosen. And whether or not all those peers have gone on to be successful has no bearing on the story. What I love about that story is, you made a decision that wasn't popular, perhaps, that wasn't in your, if you had built a vision board, moving back home with grandma wasn't on there. But what it has done, as you just so beautifully, wrapped up that story with, it brought you full circle of, you recognized the power of not having the pressure to constantly keep up a lifestyle, right? Where most people have that. And so you're able to offer something different. And in turn, here you are. You said you've been in this 25 years.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Your clients, I would imagine, have a pretty solid success record, because as when I read about your book, I know the audience is for financial advisors, but I think there's takeaways for all of us. If you're willing to look at something differently, not see it the way everybody else presents it, that's where the opportunity is. That's where you can set yourself apart. So
in the book, which I wrote the first one in 2012 solely for financial advisors, trying to communicate back to the industry, if you will, what I learned, which is, hey, it doesn't look pretty starting out, but if you can sacrifice the lifestyle and the ego, the opportunity to do the right thing in a community of people over time compounds that we are now 3, 4, 5 generations into clients. And we try to write the total relationship from both the client and the advisor standpoint. So it's a lot towards, hey, these are the ways advisors should be asking questions and listening. And this is the way Mr. and Mrs. Client, an advisor, should be behaving and asking questions.
Right.
So it was going back to the opportunity to go serve and honor the woman who sat me down and would pay me a penny because I read the page right, because I had way too much energy to want to learn how to read. But she'd catch me at the right time and we'd sit down and make it a game. And I read to this day because she sat there and had more patience than any teacher or even my mom had. And it was like this heart thing where it's like, yeah, I can do this. I can go home. I'm at a point in my career. It's a sacrifice. And the door that then opened, and there's no monetization to the memories and the quality of time that those couple years were, right?
Right.
It didn't help my marriage because my wife, my grandmother would make fresh baked I left every day with a hot cup of coffee and 2 grandma baked fresh from scratch cookies, right? So yeah, that died when I got married. But anyway, it was just they're beautiful memories. And I think it made me a better person, right? Because there's so much wisdom. I mean, the lie in the lie in the world is that somehow as you age, you become less significant. And it's in the book, and it's a philosophy we have, is that when you get into retirement, there's the go-go years. I would say that's you go have your fun, right? There's the slow-go years, which is 2 things. You're running out of things to do because going back to 2nd and 3rd and 4th time isn't as fun. And not everybody wants to do everything. And then physically you're slowing down a little bit. But the lie is the no-go years. And what I found with clients in that stage of life, the no-go years, if you've lived your life well, if you allowed yourself to go do what you felt called to do, and you've stewarded well what you have, those can be some of the richest years you have as you get to reflect back and share the wisdom with those that you love and those that you interact with. And what I've also found, and this is also in the book, a client early on in this relationship with this advisor, when I was taking over that practice and doing estate planning, I was meeting with a lot of older clients. And I would go to the care facility to meet with one client in particular, and she'd widowed by that time. They decided they didn't want to have kids in their lives. And now they have this millions of dollars in a portfolio, which to her words that she gave me, which I've used for the rest of my career, was that's black ink on white paper to me now, because I can't do anything with it. And when I was showing up, I learned from her. It was like my Tuesdays with Maury book, right? It's like when I'd show up, she was in a mindset that she was sharing some experience or something that she enjoyed doing. And it was also a teachable thing to me to go, hey, this is something to consider, to do, or to know about. Or I'd show up and she was kind of in a cranky mood and she was kind of frustrated because she was reflecting on something she wished she would have done, but didn't. And almost all of those things that she wished she would have done, she had the resources to do it, but she didn't have an advisor that said, hey, go do it.
Yeah.
And kind of along the lines of another niche is our job is to help a client realize, when do you have enough that now you can have that freedom? Now you don't have to keep working.
It's halftime here at the Play Your Position podcast, and we've got ourselves a great game. While you're up grabbing another snack and topping off your favorite beverage, make sure to subscribe to the show so you never miss another play. PYP is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever great podcasts can be found. Now, let's get back to the game.
Is there a number that you give them? I mean, is there a number, a general ballpark that I realize that as times move on, numbers can fluctuate, but for right now, what is that number?
Yeah, it's actually everybody's like everything in life. Everybody's number is different because everybody's level of what we're trying to understand what your funded contentment is.
Oh, I like that term, funded contentment.
And
Okay.
what amount of resources can bring the level of contentment that shuts down the desire for more?
Oh, wow.
Because
Okay.
more for more's sake is just more, and that's not any happier, just more.
Right.
And what we tend to find is most of, not all, but most of the clients that we have that show up with wealth saved, sacrificed, went without. And it dawned on us probably 5 years into my career that, wait a second, our job's not to make them money. That's the easy part. That takes care of itself, quite frankly. Our job is to try and help them spend it. Our job, people have this big bucket of what I would call, this is for later. And they don't realize later's now when you're 65 or 70 or 80.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, hey, what do we want to do with this extra now that it's grown? And what we really realized is we need to actually play. It's funny because it's like literally this, they consider it this bucket that they can't touch. It's a safety net for later, right? The mindset of shutting off income and now I got to take money from it. Like, really? But what we found is, and this is through trial and error of 25 years, it's literally understanding what the need is. And specific client, he could have retired 4 or 5 years earlier and didn't because he was just afraid. Right. Like it worked extra. He worked into his mid 70s as a anesthesiologist, very well off, very low level of funded contentment, meaning the house was paid for, modest home, modest vehicles, just, very appreciative of what he had, but he just didn't, he was afraid to stop working. And it was two things. One, it was showing him, hey, we can turn on this monthly amount, put it in the bank account on the 15th and replace the paycheck, which he finally let us do. But the real aha moment is that they wanted to take a trip to Europe. And he was like, it's just not comfortable. He was a little taller than most people. And he's like, my legs just cramp. And I said, well, fly first class. I can't do that.
Mindset.
I'm like, your portfolio grew last year a lot. You haven't put a dent in it. And I looked at her and I said, here, I'm putting $20,000 in your bank account for the vacation, which should include covering the tickets. And it was that act of actually putting it in the bank account. And he called me about a week later and he's like, I didn't buy first class. I'm like, what'd you do? He's like, I found out there's something called business class. I'm like, perfect, close enough, right? You can lay down, you got your own seat. When they came back from that trip, they didn't talk to me about Europe. He talked to me about, they gave me a warm washcloth, right? It was real silverware. I got to eat. I got to watch a movie. I got to lay completely flat. I slept. I wasn't jet lagged. And the aha that I was onto something was his daughter, who's now the client, because they both hence passed. Now the daughter's a client, but at the time I didn't know her from Adam. I just knew it was a daughter. I got a handwritten note from her thanking me for giving them the permission to go and enjoy this vacation. And that was like, oh my gosh, that's the job.
Yeah.
Right.
That is the job.
Yeah, it's not the portfolio. And let me talk about mid cap and small cap and why we do this and why we do that and all this other stuff, which most advisors think their job is to explain these pie charts. It's like, no, this is about people and hopes and dreams and not wanting to make regrets. Like we'll be the first person to say, hey, you might want to do that. That might cost you in the future, right? But what we find is most people that have stewarded well need more help on how to spend it than they do about saving it.
What about the people who are opposite of that? Who, I don't know if you work with people like that because they don't fit your profile. People who have been spenders, and I wonder if it's a generational thing because certainly the people you're describing grew up, they were affected by the Depression and seeing their parents. I know my parents, my dad is gone, but my mom is still alive. And, listeners know I live with my mom now. Once dad died, she needs care, and she's aging in place. She's not ready to give up the house. She wants to live in the house. And my kids were launched at that point. But like your story, that was never on my plan. Living in the home I grew up in has been, it's been a challenge to just mentally, and I think what you're getting at, Tyson, this big level point about leadership and decision-making and what you do with your money and all that really comes down to mindset and psychology and learning to let go of narratives that don't serve what you really want. First of all, identifying what you really want, and then having somebody help you understand you can fund that.
Yeah.
If you do this. But what about, do you work with people who aren't at that place yet, that are still in the trenches of work?
Yeah. So that's been the, every business coach I've ever had is like, oh, you have to have this minimum or a cutoff. And it's hard when you had an eviction notice on your refrigerator say, I'm not going to work with somebody because of money, right? It's hard to say that when a stockbroker took me, who was going to start saving $100 a month into 2 mutual funds, and took an evening to sit down with my mom because it was after her work shift to spend some time with us, that was the gift that was given me. And so we will basically our profile is somebody that wants help.
Oh, okay.
Like, I don't want to get into debate. Like, I'm not sitting here. I'm not here to try and prove anything to anybody. I'm here to listen and try and offer advice.
Right.
I'm here to offer warnings and offer encouragement. And for a lot of people, I think the statistic is for every 5 people we meet with, only 1 actually becomes a client, because the other 4 need to go back and do some things that no one is paid to tell them to do.
Like what?
Which is pay down the student debt or pay off the credit card, or you know what, you got to stop buying a car every 3 years, because that cars and homes are where people's psychology just shuts down. All of a sudden, well, for an extra 10 grand, I can get these upgrades because that's what I want. And part of life is starting to sacrifice wants for what your long-term needs are, that we're not realizing what we're doing to ourselves.
Oh.
And kind of just like the country struggles with obesity, which is some people are taking in calories and taking in things they want in the moment and not realizing what they need long-term is to maybe moderate that a little bit. People do the same thing financially, and I think sometimes worse. But there's ways to fix that, because again, part of our philosophy is at some point you have to pay yourself. Some point you have to set some of what you're working aside for you, because if you consume it all, you're going to constantly be consuming it. And that's not going to lead to this funded contentment.
Mm-hmm.
And the easiest way to tackle that is not to strap yourself to some budget and just kill yourself to then feel like a failure and then you quit. It's telling yourself the next pay raise you get, half of it needs to be set aside in this 401k or this matching plan, like you never got it.
What about people who work for themselves and they don't have a 401k or such? What are some vehicles that are good choices?
Yep. The work for yourself one's hard because they're constantly dealing with the balancing act of what's profit and what do I owe in taxes and those types of things.
Right.
It's the same thing, though. In those cases, we encourage them that, here, let's set aside what we think we're going to owe in taxes. We're going to add a little bit on top of that was what we're going to put away for retirement or for the future. But you have to take it away from yourself somehow.
Yeah.
And in those cases, we usually encourage setting up a separate bank account. Don't keep it all in one, and set it aside. And then look, when we pay the taxes, this is what's left. That's what we're saving. You don't get to take that and now consume it. So it's separating or never getting it in the first place to get it into the checking account or the bank account you spend from, and try and then just moderate it from there. But the big ones are houses and cars are what often do people in, especially if they move too many times or think they need to upgrade too many times, because the realtor fee, nothing against realtors, but this 5 or 6% hit on the full value of that house does a number on your equity because you have a debt component to that, right?
Right.
And it's a facade, given the fact that, our parents and grandparents lived in houses that were the size of our garage these days.
Seriously. Seriously. I mean, I look at the house my grandparents lived in, my maternal grandparents. They lived down in Nashville, and it's no longer, because once they were gone, the house was sold, and it was leveled, and they built a McMansion, because that's what a lot of places are doing. But yeah, I mean, it's really fascinating what the expectation is now for people with homes in terms of size and the amenities. And I love the channel HGTV, where you see all the renovations, but it's setting up what you're just describing, this constant desire for more and more and bigger and better. And we got to have this, and we're going to move there and everything. And it, as you know, I want to go back to something you said very early on about when you discovered compound interest and you saw what could happen. The only thing we can't ever get back is time, right?
That's right.
And another thing you said, which I really loved, was this concept of compound opportunity. It's not something we talk about, but opportunities can compound on themselves. And they sometimes come out of, again, hardship, sacrifice, making a decision that isn't popular with a peer group or with the family, but you know in your heart it's right. And over time, that opportunity is going to compound itself. So I imagine that if people go do what you say, okay, pay down the credit card debt, wrangle up the student loans or figure out how to enjoy what you have and start putting away for your future. What's the process then? I mean, are you a big proponent of setting up trust? Is that a great way to protect wealth? If someone gets an inheritance, what are some things that the average person needs to be thinking about that might not know, but you do because you're in it every day?
Yeah, I think I want to break that down into two demographics, retired and not retired.
Okay, good.
Okay. So for the retired, what I want to say to the retired people is that trust and estate planning is important. The trusts that used to be set up more for estate planning are becoming less and less needed, given how much wealth needs to be in place to have an estate tax problem.
Okay.
For a couple, it's in the $26,000 or $27,000 or $27,000. Excuse me. It's in the $26 to $27 million for a married couple to have a taxable estate. That may change in a couple of years if the tax code changes. But trusts are used for keeping your financial transactions to your loved ones or passing to your loved ones private. So that's why someone would use a trust. Because the only other way to do that is through probate process or beneficiary forms, although a lot of states and a lot of assets people have in 401ks or IRAs, even your homes these days in a lot of states, you can put a beneficiary or an owner after you that it transfers at your death. So probate becomes less and less necessary. That's what the trust things are for. Or trusts are used to have control from the grave where you want to protect or hold money in trust for some loved one, for some protection against themselves or for some reason that they're too young before you want them to have access to it. But for that demographic, the retired demographic, those that have reached the point of funded contentment and they're enjoying their lives and they have enough, and maybe they're in their no-go years or your 70s and 80s or your slow-go or no-go years, your 70s, 80s, and 90s. I find it ironic that a lot of people are leaving everything they have to their kids, but not telling their kids anything that they have.
That you're seeing that pattern?
Oh, it's all the time.
What would be behind that? Just the secrecy around money that they were raised with?
I think that's part of it. I think the fear is they want to have a relationship that's not contingent upon money. I think it's
yep, that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of it. And yet on our end, we're trying to encourage opportunities to talk with the kids to understand what their needs are or not, or aren't, because they may be making sacrifices that down the road, if all of a sudden they get this inheritance they didn't know they were getting, they might have made a different choice for a better quality of life. That if the inheritance is somewhat of a certainty, why don't we do them a service and let them know, hey, or I encourage a lot of clients to do what we call giving while you're living. If you're going to leave it all in the end, why don't we give them $5 or $10 or $15 or $20,000 a year every year as a gift or as a graduation or the wedding or step in? Or if you're worried your kid's a spendthrift, okay, cut the check against their mortgage. Right? They get the financial benefit. They don't see it necessarily to spend it in ways.
Right.
Or we help them try and fund Roth IRAs or help them fund investments in their names that they can't cash flow now, but can have the benefit thereof.
That's really,
for the people.
That's smart. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like the first question to a client's kid is, are you maxing out your retirement plan? No. How much are you short? I'm short $1,000 a month. Okay. Well, if we gifted you $1,000 a month for mom and dad, you can now avoid the tax on the $1,000 a month that you can now max your 401k. That's family wealth planning is what it is.
Okay. And that, I imagine, I mean, I'm naive here because I don't move in your world, but I imagine that that's a fairly new category where these kinds of conversations are happening. And going back to something you just said about the secrecy or not telling kids what's coming because of the dynamic that could ensue, where suddenly there might be some bad blood between siblings or feeling like, am I going to get my fair share? I mean, we've all seen the ads, we've seen the movies, the true crime, on these all true crime podcasts and these shows that keep cropping up because it's a mess out there, right? So
nothing is improved by not having conversations.
I agree. Oh, I agree 100%.
And so part of the Total Relationship book is the fact that part of the relationship, the F in form for my business name is Form Wealth Advisors. The F in form stands for family.
Okay.
And I've had many families where I've said to the parents, when we reach the point where we've identified funded contentment, when we reach a point that we've identified, hey, you have enough. Now, what do we want to do with the extra? So if this has grown to $1 million or $2 million or whatever the dollar amount is, now it grows beyond that. Can we carve some of that out when we get it and give it away? Whether that's to charities, friends and family, a lot of times it's for kids. And what I say to them is, if you're willing, my preference is to interview each one of your kids, build a financial plan for each one of them, and help speak into what's best for them to do with the gift. It's theirs to choose what to do with.
Right.
It also creates a legacy for us because we're interacting with the child's best interest in the beginning. So when we meet them at the funeral, we're not strangers.
Right. That's yeah.
One child, it's, hey, they want to build a deck onto the house. The other child is, hey, let's pay off the student loan. The other child is, let's get a car. And the agreement with the parents are, and the kids, I'm not sharing with your mom and dad what you're doing with this. They're trusting me to come and advise you of what to do with it. And if you want to share with them, you can share with them. I remember the first couple I did this with, they had 3 kids and like, hey, we want to give $10,000. They're only to do that with one exception. And they looked at me kind of funny. They're like, what's the exception? I said, I want you to have a 4th child that's a spendthrift. And they kind of look perplexed and they're like, well, who's that? And I said, it's you. If you're giving $10,000 away to each one of your kids, I want you to take $10,000 and do something extravagant that you would normally not have done with what you have because they were minimalist. They didn't spend a penny of what they had.
Yeah.
And again, more money doesn't necessarily bring more happiness. I wasn't asking them to go become somebody they weren't. Ironically, I think they took a couple more trips a year. They upgraded a few flights. Maybe they upgraded the type of hotel they stood at. They loved to hike, which isn't that expensive. You just have to get where you're going. But it became a joke. And to the kids, I said, hey, mom and dad are giving you some of this money. And they're like, okay, great. And I said, the best part of it is, and they gave me permission to tell the kids this, I said, they're getting the same gift as if they were the spendthrift kids. So you got to give your parents a hard time on what to go spend that with. But it became this relationship experience bonding. It's the job is a ministry. It is fun. It's why you get out of bed in the morning. And it has so little to do with compounded interest or profits or portfolios. It's about people. It's about helping them steward what they have. It's help protecting them from themselves, whether it's just because being afraid to spend it in some cases is as bad as the person that spends too much.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, you have described some interesting and different approaches to having conversations about money, particularly if there's family money. Also, I love the go-go years, the slow-go years, and the no-go years, breaking it down. Funded contentment, that's a new term too that I think listeners will definitely walk away, thinking differently about, their own level of funded contentment. What does that look like? And then, ultimately, Tyson, what you do is you come at this from the right place. You really do come from your heart and wanting people to make sound decisions. And you also help people grow by giving them permission, helping them give themselves permission to enjoy what they've worked so hard for. So good. So for people who want to know where you hang out online, check you out, where can they find you?
Yeah. So the business is Form Wealth Advisors. Form Wealth, FORM wealth.com is a website that they can go and get more information on.
Okay.
The book, Total Relationship, is on Amazon. We actually did an audiobook, and it's not an audiobook where we're sitting there reading the book to people. We actually had about a 3-hour conversation about each chapter, and
cool.
It's not, and then because it's more about getting information out than it is about selling things, we have it on Amazon for 99 cents as kind of a way to go listen to it.
Nice.
And if they want to go get the book after that, that's great. Or share feedback on what they liked or didn't like. We'd love that as well. But professionally, it's also just LinkedIn is a great resource for people to go kind of connect professionally.
Great.
But yeah, it is all about, which was a great question that you asked in the beginning of like, where did leadership start? It started when I realized it didn't need to be about me. It needed to be about other people.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of the paradoxes of life is leadership is all about you and it's not about you at all. And
That's right.
I think everybody listening has gone through some iteration of having that wake up call that, oh, this isn't about me. This is really about who I'm serving. And you have clearly chosen a path. I can tell you're very enthusiastic. You love what you do. You're knowledgeable. You have great experience and you have lots of case studies and clients to say, Tyson and his team really helped us. Who helps you, Tyson? What are a couple of books that have been instrumental on your leadership journey?
Great question. One, I'm a student teacher, so I love to learn and then share what I learned. So before I got to the books, just the designations of becoming a certified financial planning practitioner.
Yeah.
I got a certification in business exit planning. I'm a certified investment management analyst over portfolios. So I have beyond this, the college and the continuing education, just the licenses, I've gone out and gotten 3 different third-party designations that hold a standard of excellence and continuing education. It's constantly learning. I've done 25 books since December 15th after I stumbled back onto how Audible can kind of be a great resource, especially you get the book and then you listen to it and then you underline it while you're listening to it. And ironically, the most recent one that I've read like 3 or 4 times is called Counterfeit Gods.
Okay. Not heard of that one. That's good.
It's Mark Keller. It's a Christian book. Mark Keller is teaching more than he's preaching, but it's about how we make idols in our lives out of things that are meaningless.
Interesting. Okay. Counterfeit gods.
Counterfeit gods. And it's sex, power, money, success. It's our careers. It's all this stuff that in the end, and this is my greatest book of wisdom comes from every client I sit down with that's your mom's age. That's like, what'd you learn? Like, what did you wrong and what'd you do right? And then the greatest thing I ever learned when I was in my 20s, because I'm like, who am I to tell this 60-year-old anything?
Yeah.
In my 20s, but I was realizing, wait a second, I'm talking to people that are 70, 80, and 90. So I started asking in the beginning, all these people, what was your greatest success? And what was your greatest failure? And the knowledge I got from that allowed me to go to the 60-year-old and say, hey, you know what? You might want to retire because sticking it out 2 more years when your house is paid for and this is done and this is done and this is done, like you can't get that time back.
Right.
And it allowed, so that's the other thing. It's like we get to share this, whether it's talking to someone that's older than us, having mentors, reading it in books. The resources are everywhere. It's giving yourself permission to take the time to do it.
Yeah. Oh, that is one of your mantras for today's conversation. And team, I hope you're hearing this, is give yourself permission to do the things that you really want before it's too late. Because guess what? One day you will wake up and you will say, where is the time gone? And anybody who's a parent and their kids are gone, like I'm raising my hand here, you say, where did all that time go? How did it go so fast? And people will tell you when you're in the midst of it, oh, enjoy it now because it goes fast. You're like, yeah, I got to get on to the next thing, right? Then you wake up and so anyway, team, I will have links to connect with Tyson on his show notes page at pyppodcast.com, including a link to this book, Counterfeit Gods. And Tyson, I like to give my guests the last word. What do you want your leadership legacy to look like?
That I change the financial services industry for the better.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I can change a financial advisor, I can change the impact they have on 100 clients. I don't need to have everybody as a client. That's not the goal. That's why the book was written, hence the podcast, and just trying to help give people, they know there's a better way. They're just lost in how to do it in a financial industry that continues to produce products and services that need to be peddled out to consumers for profit's sake instead of for the person's sake. And so that's why the book was written, and that's the passion I have that fuels me in doing this.
Well, that is a fantastic message. And I want to thank you for your time today, coming on the show and enlightening us about this new way of thinking about our own retirements and about the dynamics in our families. This has been great.
Enjoyed it. Thank you for having me on.
Hey team, Mary Lou here. Who's number one in football changes from year to year. Fashion trends come and go, same with musical tastes. But leadership skills, they never go out of style. In fact, these days, leadership is an essential survival skill for a world that demands more from us than ever before. To succeed these days, you need to know how to show up for yourself so that you can then do the work you love with people you like the way you want. The Play Your Position Leadership Playbook helps you do this, and it's free. Go to pyppodcast.com to download your copy today. If being more successful this year, next year, in the 21st century is on your to-do list, get your copy of the Play Your Position Leadership Playbook now. pyppodcast.com. It's at the top of the page. You can't miss it. That's pyppodcast.com, and start being more of the leader you are meant to be today. This podcast was produced by Daniel Romeros. Show notes for this episode can be found over at pyppodcast.com. I'm Mary Lou Kaiser. Thanks for listening.
Here at the Play Your Position podcast, we believe that the road to self-mastery and a life well lived starts with answering the call to leadership. That's when the fun really begins. Send this episode to any friends who might need to hear the inspiration and ideas you heard today. And feel free to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform.